Oh, good evening, everybody. I'm Graham Pask, Chairman of Eastern Area Planning. I'd like to welcome you to this first live meeting of Eastern Area Planning members. In fact, this is the first time we are doing, as a council, a hybrid meeting where we're using Zoom and councillors sitting all COVID compliantly, well separated in the council chamber. So this is I think untested technology in a live situation, so please bear with us. I'm confident that it'll work. I know Kevin, head of IT, has done a lot of work and we have been practicing, but please bear with us as much as you can. Other members of the committee in attendance are councillors Tony Linden, Royce Longton, Ross McKinnon, Alan Macro, Jeff Mays, Richard Somner, Joe Stewart and Keith Woodhams. The following officers are in attendance, mainly on Zoom. So I've got Bob Dray, who's the Development Control Team Leader, Alice Atwood, who's a Senior Planning Officer, Paul Goddard, a Principal Highways Officer, and Kim Maher, who is our solicitor, to keep us all on the straight and narrow. In the room also is Linda Pye, who is from Strategic Support, our Policy Officer, who will be taking the minutes. And I'm also assisted by Kevin Griffin, who will be our Zoom host for the evening. Now, before we start, I would like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that, as I said before, this is a meeting held in a hybrid format. So following the expiry of the emergency coronavirus regulations that permitted remote meetings, all the council's public meetings must now take place in person at a single specified geographical location with a physical presence in that location. In other words, we've all got to be in the council chamber. Now, officers presenting items on the agenda, parish council representatives, supporters, objectors, the applicant or agent making a presentation will also be encouraged to do so remotely by Zoom, but are very welcome to come here as long as the numbers are correct, that they can come and present to us in a live format. And we do have two gentlemen here this evening doing that. So, officers presenting items, the meeting then will be live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow the proceedings. And for the benefit of those engaging remotely, I will ask the clerk, Linda Pye, to run through some of the standard reminders about the way in which we conduct meetings, council meetings, via Zoom. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. In addition to the points displayed on the screen, if it becomes necessary for members to telephone into the meeting, you will not be able to indicate to speak. So once everyone else who has raised a Zoom hand has spoken, the chairman will ask anyone who has telephoned in to speak in order. For any votes, members of the committee in the council chamber are the only ones who can take part in the formal decision. If we need to adjourn the meeting for any reason, then the chairman will advise members of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it is a short adjournment, you'll be able to rejoin this Zoom meeting. Otherwise, a fresh appointment will be sent. Do members have any questions?
Sorry, Linda, do we have any apologies, please?
Yes, apologies from Councillor Alan Law.
And I believe it's Councillor Stewart is substituting for Councillor Law. Welcome. Right, members, I'd ask if you're willing to accept the minutes of the previous meetings as a true and accurate record. This is the meetings of Eastern Area Planning on the 21st of April and the short meeting on the 4th of May, where you elected me as chairman. Thank you.
Proposed, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Thank you. Those in favour? Thank you very much. I will apparently sign those electronically somehow by magic. I'll do that afterwards. Thank you. Members, do you have any declarations of interest? No? In that case, I'm going to turn to application number 2003-068, Button Court Farm, Windmill Lane in Midgham. And I will ask Mr. Dray to introduce the report. Thank you, Mr. Dray.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just confirm you're all seeing the presentation full screen?
Perfect, thank you.
We are.
Okay. Members, this first application before you tonight is at Buttoncourt Farm, Windmill Lane in Midgham. The proposal is the erection of a farm owner's dwelling with garage and associated access. It's before you tonight because it was being called in by Councillor Pask if recommended for refusal by officers. And the recommendation is for refusal on 2 grounds, which I will come to. Here you should be able to see the application site in the middle here in red, northwest of Wolverhampton, in the countryside of Midgham. Buttoncourt Farm is this little enclave here. This slide shows you some of the key planning constraints to give you a bit of context. So the site is on this one highlighted outlined in blue. There are no black lines, so this is open countryside away from any settlement boundary. So our countryside housing and countryside policies apply. It is outside of, but very close to the North Wessex Downs AONB, which is represented by this green hatching to the north, just up here. Members will recall on those who attended the site visit, the line of trees there as a point of reference. There are a few listed buildings in the one on the farm and a few scattered around, indicated by these greeny coloured with the red outline blobs. And we also have some local wildlife sites in orange in the area. And you can see the green dashes where you have public rights of way. So where we stood on site centrally there's the closest one is one on the opposite side of the woodland here, and then there's one to the south across here, but members will recall the topography when we're on site and the intervening vegetation that covers most of that. So here is the proposed site plan. It's on the southern side of the road, accessed off the existing area of hard standing and track that comes off to the south where the barn, there was the existing barn, and there's also barns which are currently proposed under a separate planning application, which I'll show you for reference in a moment. So there's an access road coming off there, and there you have the house with a detached garage, and it's got the tree that a lot of we all saw on site, just as a point of reference. If members need it, I've got more detailed zoomed in version of the plan there. So that's the proposed elevations of the house. See hipped form, quite typical of what we see in the area. The northern elevation is what is facing the road, and you can see the ground levels drop to where the garage was further to the west. The western elevation, so that's as you're coming up the road. Eastern elevation facing the barns by where we stood, and then the southern elevation looking across that open field. And we have the floor plans for you. And the roof plan, which again is quite good at showing you've got the existing barn there, which we pass, and then where there's a proposed new farm building down here and the one here. And that's some details of the proposed garage, external staircase, and little loft store above. I've got a series of pictures here that have been submitted, which hopefully give some context in terms of the site levels, because it's quite a sloping site, as members would have appreciated when we walked around last week. So this one is looking up from the south. This plan's been submitted to show the relationship between the garage and the house, but obviously shows the other farm buildings on the other side of the road to the north. So the top one there's the same, and then this bottom one here is looking across at the existing barn and the proposed barn there. So this is the road that bisects the farm, the enclave there. So you can see the garage further down the hill. And then we have a couple of existing and proposed, again, showing very similar, but hopefully it helps illustrate the change in levels across the site. And so that one again is cutting across the road. So there you can see the existing barn, and then with the proposed barn coming in play and the house there. So these barns are on the other side of the track. So our application site is to the left here. So this is just for information what's being considered at the moment with a live planning application that hasn't been determined yet. And it's for barns of this kind of appearance on the eastern side of the track. And the second plan shows of the remainder. I'll flow through some pictures. So that's looking straight across the road towards the site. So the house is proposed roughly in this location here. A bit closer up. So the access is coming off this track here. So to the right of this picture. That's looking north back from where we stood back up at the other farm buildings on the northern side of the road. So you can note the levels dropping down to the west. So the house is proposed just off here to the left. And that's looking across the field. So the house is proposed in this kind of area here. Again, looking west across the application site. So this near field, primarily, the garage behind. Just a bit of a wider shot from further up the road. And this is just a picture of the northern side of the road from the farm building. So you've got the existing bungalow here. This is the access track we walked through and up to the top viewpoint. Just looking a little around to the left. And then that's west of the site, looking back up the hill. So the house is proposed, again, the tree for reference in this field here. Okay. So as obviously we've set out our detailed assessment in the agenda report, Midgham Parish Council haven't raised any objections, and there are 11 supporters to the application, no objections. These are summarised from page 25 of the report. There's been no objection on technical grounds such as highways, conservation in regard to the listed building given the intervening buildings, or trees, and a few others which are detailed in the report. So the two main issues, as we see it, are the principle of development and the impact on the character and appearance of the area. So I will go through this fairly quickly. Obviously, we can look in more detail if needs be. But in terms of the principle of development, members be aware that in the countryside, there's a policy presumption against new residential development, except in exceptional circumstances. And those exceptional circumstances are defined by other policies in the local plan. So the one that's relevant to this particular case is policy C5, which relates to rural workers. So it gives criteria for policies which a proposal needs to comply with in order to be in accordance with our housing policies as a whole. I mean, they're set out in the screen before you, have them in the report, but in essence, in summary, they relate to demonstrating an essential need for the rural worker to be present in that location, demonstrating that there's no alternative housing available to meet that need, and that there's been no recent severance of housing from the site in the recent past, ensuring that the enterprise is financially viable and therefore can support the enterprise, so a new house isn't permitted, and then subsequently the enterprise fails and you're left with a tied house. And then a few criteria which fundamentally relate to the size and location and the nature of the dwelling and its impacts on the character and appearance of the area. So the applicants have provided an agricultural appraisal, which is included in the plans pack as part of your agenda. Officers have instructed Kernan's countryside consultants to provide an independent assessment of that to understand how it, to get an independent view on the compliance with policy C5, and that's also included in the plans pack. There's also been supporting financial information, which has been provided to members in a Part 2 confidential report, given the commercial sensitivity. So there isn't any dispute over figures that's more provided, so you have a complete picture of the enterprise. So we haven't proposed any Part 2 meeting, but of course that's open to members. But I would just remind members to be careful not to discuss any figures in the public meeting. So I'll just quickly summarize where officers are on this base informed by our agricultural consultants. In terms of the need, according to the application, there's 80 hectares of permanent pasture land associated with the farm, and presently there's 16 crossbred beef suckler cows and followers at the farm. Calving takes place all year round, and that's what the purported need relates to. There are 2 houses in the vicinity. One is a bungalow, which was the first building as we went up that track, which has where the applicant's mother has a life tenancy, so that's not available. And then there's the old farmhouse, which was sold in 2004, so beyond the threshold that the policy would look to given its age. So there's no available accommodation in that respect that's been accepted. But our consultants have, in their view, 16 suckler cows and followers isn't sufficient to demonstrate an essential need in the context of our policy. And having regard to the proposed expansion plans with the new barns, that is also insufficient in their view. Their opinion is that you'd be looking at around 40 cows before an essential need is likely to be demonstrated in their experience. So that's fundamentally where our view on that is based. So off the back of that, our view is that it conflicts with the first 2 criteria. In terms of alternatives, as I said, there's no, the 2 dwellings on site it's been accepted are not available. There is a query over whether there's potential for converting further buildings, but I think the primary point here is that the applicant lives within close proximity to the site, 2 miles in the nearby village. And given our consultants' conclusions that the need is not made out, it also follows that the need that has been demonstrated is not sufficient. That proximity is sufficient in order to meet that need. So essentially conflicting with that part of the policy. In terms of viability and the size of the dwelling, so there's no dispute over the figures that have been provided. I won't mention any of them, but our consultants say it's profitable and sustainable, but just point out that it's quite marginal in that respect. So that's, again, detailed in the report. So the remaining criteria really also factor into our second reason for refusal, and that's the landscape, character and appearance considerations. And fundamentally, it's to do with the size and location of the building. So first, in terms of size, Kernan's commented that it's quite a large dwelling for a rural workers' dwelling. So we've adopted that view. But fundamentally, it's the location that we have concerns with. This is the countryside in this area is quite quintessential of the countryside we find in the wider countryside north of the A4, and shares many of the characteristics with the A and B of the mosaic of woodland and undulating fields. So it's quite, and obviously given its immediate setting of the A and B, I think it's quite a valuable landscape in that respect. So we are concerned with siting it in an undeveloped aspect of the field. So just looking at that picture on screen there, putting a house in the middle there and interrupting the openness of the public views in that aspect is fundamentally where our concerns lie. And we do query whether there are, if the need was accepted, or preferable sites on the other side of the road, for example, where there is other built up development, other buildings. So that's where we're coming from on the 2 reasons for refusal in terms of the principal development and character and appearance of the area. There is nothing I need to report on the update, so I shall hand back to you there, Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Dre. And members, just to remind you, I know it's been a year since we've had a proper meeting, but if you think of any questions you'd like to ask our planning officer, please note them and we will ask those after we've had those who others wish to present to us. Quite often those questions are answered. So please make a note of them. We have no parish councillor representative to speak. We have no objectors to speak, but we do have on Zoom 2 supporters. So we have Barbara Gray and Toby Dyson. Now, if you could both unmute, please. the way, if I could just briefly explain, and Mrs. Gray, yes, you've done it, well done. And Mrs. Gray, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Good. And Mr. Dyson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And we can all hear you through the system, so that's brilliant. What we have a very strict time limit of up to 5 minutes. I have my clerk out of the corner of my eye who's going to wave to me with 30 seconds to go, and I will relay that to you. And that is 5 minutes between you. So how you divide the time up is entirely up to you. Would you like a halfway check, for example, if you both intend to speak?
I think I only need like less than a minute or maximum.
You go first, and I don't know which way you want to do it. I'm not being prescriptive, but as I say, the total time is up to 5 minutes. But please remain unmuted after you're finished, because members may well have questions. So who's going to start?
I don't mind.
Right. Well, in that case, Mr. Dyson, you start for your minute, and then Mrs. Gray can finish it off.
No worries, no at all. Okay, so my wife and I have lived at Button Court Farmhouse for over 10 years, and we fully support the proposed dwelling. Andrew is a very diligent and thoughtful farmer. We thoroughly enjoy living next to the farm. We hear the cows from the front of our house, which faces his fields. There have been occasions during carving where we've called Andrew at 2 or 3 in the morning, letting him know that it sounded like one of his cows made it his experience and his assistance. If Andrew lived on site, in our opinion, this would bring a positive impact to the welfare of all his animals, which I know is of paramount importance to him. That's me done.
Right, Mrs. Gray.
Oh, hello. Yes, good evening. I'm Barbara Gray. I've lived in Midgham with my husband since 1985. I'm here to support Andrew's application. We've known Andrew and his family since 1985. We now own a small 60-acre farm on the western edge of Midgham. This farm qualifies for higher level stewardship, and Andrew has looked after this land for us with great care over the past 26 years, proving to be a very able and dedicated farmer. Andrew was born at Button Court Farm, his father and grandfather having farmed there before him. Since his father died 2 years ago, he's been managing Button Court Farm from his home in Upper Bucklebury, keen to carry on as a traditional Berkshire farmer. He's passionately keen to care for his animals in the best way possible. He currently has in excess of 50 cattle at the farm, 26 of which are suckler breeding cows. Obviously, it is these breeding cows which are most likely to need his immediate attention, during calving particularly. Andrew knows that such care and attention can only really be achieved if he lives on the farm close to his animals. He needs to be on hand should there be any animal welfare issues that require his attention. And I must stress, the welfare of 10 or 20 cows is no less important than the welfare of 50 or 100. This planning application is for an attractive, modest dwelling which resembles a converted agricultural barn. Its planned position is close to the other farm buildings and has been carefully designed to fit in and not to look out of place with its surroundings. Its impact on the views from the nearby roads will be minimal. Indeed, I think the plans shown earlier make this very clear. Midgham Parish Council, of which I'm a member, has given its full support to this application. I cannot see any reason why such a modest building built to fulfill such an understandable need should be refused planning consent. It's worth noting that Mr. Inwood is free to build an agricultural building in the same position without the need for any planning permission. This building could be considerably less attractive and with no restrictions or guidance from the local planning authority. I strongly believe that this application should be approved. Thank you for your time.
Right, well, thank you, Mrs. Graham. Thank you for being well in time. Members, do you have any questions for those who have just presented? If so, please physically raise your hands. We're going to let you off lightly, I think. But thank you very much. Could I just trouble you to both mute again, please? Thank you. And now the applicant and agent, Matthew Williams and Andrew Inwood. Welcome, gentlemen, in the flesh, so to speak. Are you both going to talk?
Just me, Chair.
Just you?
I did confirm, yeah.
That's absolutely fine. Please come to the lectern. I'm sure Mr. Inwood, in that he has his name down, if there are any questions that he could directly answer that you perhaps are less able to, then you could come and answer them. Right. Again, same rules, up to 5. That should be on already. If you speak loudly, and we'll do a little test in just a second before you start, but it should be okay. And you have up to 5 minutes. Please remain there for any questions that members may have. Do you want to just see if it does work?
Yep. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay, good evening, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Matt Williams of Brimble Lee, representing Mr. Inwood, who's here this evening as the applicant. You've already heard some speakers say that Button Court Farm has been in the Inwood family since 1938, with Andrew being a third-generation family farmer. Andrew inherited the farm in April 2019 following the death of his father, and he dearly wanted to keep the family farm running, despite the challenges faced in the UK farming industry. One thing you haven't heard, and I think it's been underplayed perhaps, is a significant change to planning policy in 2018, which actually made provision where an essential need for a new dwelling in the countryside includes those taking majority control of a business as part of the farm succession process. And that is exactly what you have before you. When Andrew inherited the farm, there were 17 head of cattle. He quickly built up to 39, but unfortunately lost 15 cows due to an outbreak of TB. Andrew is now currently up to 26 cows with a stock bull, and all calves will be kept on and finished for beef. And this means there are 52 head of animals on the farm at this moment. At this point, we believe there has been some confusion around Andrew's aspirations from the farm. 25 cows was never a ceiling for his growth, and this will be significantly increased with the new buildings which we're expected to be approved shortly. With regards to the sight and sound test, your officers and consultant believe animal welfare requirements can be met by the existing dwelling in Upper Bucklebury, 2.5 miles and a 5-minute drive away. This is strongly disputed. The enterprise involves year-round calving, and regular checks are essential throughout the daytime and evening to monitor the welfare of animals. On average, this will involve 5 trips between home and the farm every day, and even more when Andrew knows that a cow is going into labour. You often see officers recommending refusal with new dwellings in the countryside where they increase car traffic, whereas this proposal will actually significantly reduce the number of car movements with associated environmental benefit. In terms of the dwelling size, there is no formula to calculate the size of the dwelling based on the scale of an enterprise. The consultant incorrectly measured the size of the dwelling in their initial assessment and is now referring to national minimum space standards to justify the dwelling being too large. With respect, these national standards were designed to prevent undersized and poor quality housing, particularly in urban areas, and are therefore an inappropriate measure to judge this proposal. When you remove the farm toilet, washroom, utility, and office, the floor space of this 3-bed dwelling is 217 square meters, 2,340 square feet, which I hope you will agree is not unusually large, particularly when taking into account this being the principal dwelling for the farm. By way of comparison, an agricultural workers dwelling was approved at Warren Farm in Beesmore in 2017. That followed a temporary permission as it was a new enterprise. That dwelling had a gross internal area of 332 square meters, 3,570 square feet. With regards to funding, planning policy does not require new dwellings to be funded by the farm business or existing property. And you can therefore discount this area of concern, we would suggest. With the approved dwelling at Warren Farm, the officer report, which was also based on consultancy input, recognised a marginal business profit, but appreciated that business was growing without any question of how this much larger dwelling would be funded or maintained. In terms of visual impact, obviously you all had the opportunity to visit the site last week, and we hope you agree that the location of the site has been well chosen because it well relates to the existing buildings on both sides of the lane, which is needed for optimum animal welfare supervision. Scale has been limited to 1.5 stories to minimize its impact, and conditions in respect of materials and landscaping will ensure the development integrates with its context. We do not believe the development will have any impact whatsoever on the setting of the AONB, which is further north. So in conclusion, this proposal represents a genuine, essential need for Andrew to be readily available in the interests of animal welfare, having taken majority of control of the farm in 2019. And this simply cannot be fulfilled by living in Upper Bucklebury, particularly given his intention and ability to develop the family enterprise further. Every possible step has been taken through location, scale and design to ensure the dwelling respects rural character of the area, and we therefore sincerely hope you will grant planning permission. Thank you very much for your time. Happy to answer any questions at the chairman's discretion.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Members, I have one or two questions, but if any of you have first, please indicate. Or shall I kick? Oh, Councillor Stewart.
Hopefully,
Yes.
this is working. The first time with a microphone. Thank you very much for your information. That was really interesting to hear. Clearly, we have the reports and we read all of that through, but it's good to also hear sort of additional context that you're adding in. I just wanted to clarify numbers, because there seems to be a key sort of linchpin of this planning application is around the number of cattle or cows or stock. And I've seen mention of 75 animals, 52, I think you've just mentioned 26 at the moment. So could you just clarify, and I don't know whether that actually is a question for you or for the business owner, shall we say, but what is the intention?
If I can please answer that to start with, and then perhaps if I can bring Andrew in to talk about the real world on the farm.
Absolutely.
When the agricultural appraisal was written some time ago, as I said, at the time, it was referenced to 16. I think I heard you've got a copy of the agricultural appraisal with you. But obviously that was a moment in time. It's the same with any farm, numbers fluctuate up and down. But as I said, at this moment in time, and as I've sort of read out, Andrew currently has 26 suckler cows and a stock bull. And then with the calves, he's currently got 52 head of cattle at this moment in time. In terms of where he wants to go, that really is kind of the capacity based on the infrastructure that he's got with existing buildings, which is why he desperately needs more space to be able to take the farm forward. And I think at that point, I'll let Andrew talk about where he wants to be in terms of numbers. But yeah, it's kind of at his capacity, but it's chicken and egg. He can't increase the amount of herd without being close by to look after them. So if that's okay, Chair?
It is okay, but I have to say, I would ask Mr. Inwood that he only answers the question in that you have done the presentation. So please come forward, but please don't give us a presentation. We've had that. We are now in the questioning phase. So you've had a very good question. Actually, it was one I was going to ask, but anyway, I don't mind. It has been asked. That's the important thing. How many cows have you got? And ultimately, with hope, how many would you wish?
At the present moment, I have 26 cows and a stock bull, and with the young calves, because we've just had another 14 calves just been born just recently, and that puts me with the followers on that I've got at the moment up to 52 animals on the farm at the moment. But you know, it changes. It can change so quickly. You know, so if you have 15, 12, 15 born, then that's how it can fluctuate so much. But the reason that the cows have jumped up so much so quickly is because the bull is just about to go out, and I've got some of the heifers, so that some of the females now are big enough and mature enough to go to the bull, and they're going to the bull this time, so they are now in with the suckler herd. So that's why the suckler cows have jumped up so quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks very much. And Mr. Williams, thank you for the presentation. Question to either of you gentlemen, actually. You mentioned that this is you're the third generation, Mr. Inwood, operating at Button Court Farm. I think this application is largely going to turn on whether there's an essential need for the farmer to live on site. I was just wondering, in all that time, how many years would the your ancestors have lived on site? Has it been an essential need for them to be on site in the past?
Well, it has, yeah. Because like, to start with, it used to be we had a milking herd, and my grandfather done a milk round. My father carried on with that until it just was not profitable anymore, and that's when he eventually got rid of the cows and moved into having suckler cows and carrying on to for beef animals. And they've always lived on site. Obviously, my grandparents lived in the original farmhouse, as my parents did in half of it to start with. In actual fact, I mean, when I was very first born, there was a farm worker living in the second part of the farmhouse, and although I don't remember it, but when I was very young, until the age of 3, we lived in a caravan up on the bank and slept in the shed. That's how my parents started out, yeah, they've always been on the farm. And then my parents recently converted the cow shed over the back, as you saw when you visited the site, and my parents lived there. So yeah, there's always been presence on the farm. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Mays.
I think. Can you hear me now? Yes. Mr. Inwood, I know that you've got 80 hectares of land. Is that sufficient to feed all your 52 or more cattle?
Certainly, and more, yeah. I also make hay and haylage, which I sell.
Is that hay or silage?
Well,
both.
Silage for the cattle.
Yes.
And I additionally make hay and haylage, which I sell to people with horses.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Thank you very much.
Yes. Sorry, Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed from the confidential accounts information, I'm not going to quote any numbers before anybody panics, that quite a large proportion of the profit actually comes from the basic payment scheme.
Yes.
Now, I understand that the basic payment scheme is going to be phased out over the next 7 years.
Correct, yeah.
So I was wondering what kind of you have in mind to actually kind of replace that income going forward?
There's a new scheme coming into place, which we don't know fully. We don't fully know how that's going to operate at the moment. But more about sort of rewilding and such forth. But at the moment, we don't really know how it's going to be replaced.
And would you have the land to actually do the rewilding or the turning pieces over to nature, shall we say?
Well, I guess it means it's going to be small areas around the outside and stuff like that, I would presume. But at the minute, we don't really know exactly what we're going to be asked to do. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question because that's the options are not there for us at the present.
I thought it might be difficult, but if I give you an opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, sorry, can I ask another?
Yeah, Councillor Stewart, you may indeed.
Thank
as long as it's not the other one I was going to ask.
Oh, well, I can't read your mind, Chairman, so I'm sure it might be. There is suggestion in the officer's report about whether if we decided that a dwelling was necessary to be on site, that it could be perhaps on the north side of the road from where the site, the applicant site is at the moment. And I think it's quoted that the agent has said that wouldn't be feasible. And I just wondered why that wouldn't be feasible. Would you be able to explain that?
Well, I can't see anything. We don't have any buildings that's suitable for conversion. If I were to knock down a lot of buildings there, because a lot of those buildings are so close to put an house in, you probably have to knock down at least 2 or 3 buildings, and then which I would have to replace somewhere at the other side of the road, because although they're not necessarily suitable for livestock, you can still park machines in them and keep animal feed in them and such, associated stuff for the farm.
And is there seemed to be some land there, sorry, the sort of, because obviously we walked up there, you took us through, and there seemed to be some land, but obviously I wouldn't know what that land was used for. But is there any other, I guess what I'm asking for, not necessarily to convert another building, because this application is to build a brand new dwelling, could there actually be some land available on the north side that perhaps might allay some fears that people have about moving across the road and the impact on the countryside?
Well, I can't see where. personally, I can't see where. I mean, right in the very bottom corner, I guess, as you go in the gate there, you know, right in that. So when you went in the gate, right in the maybe in the very bottom, but it's very wet down in there.
Okay.
Personally, I can't see, and you're taking me further and further away from the cattle. You know, you know, I'm on site, but I'm not, you know, the further you move me away from the animals, I'm going to see here less. Where we're proposing is all the sheds where the animals are housed are right around the house.
Okay, that's absolutely fun. You had a conversation with us about security as well, so that's where I was sort of heading, and why it wasn't feasible to be across the other side of the road, but that makes sense. Thank you.
Well, for security as well, where it is, because as Matt said, it's the optimum place to see as much of the farm as possible. But if I'm poked down in the bottom corner where we're talking about, really all I see is the entrance into the farm. I wouldn't even see the top of the farm on that side of the road. And it's just, well, yeah, that was the reason for choosing where we are, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. And yes, security was my question. I'm not asking you questions, Mr. Inwood, because all the ones I thought of, which were cows, future plans, security, positioning, and so on, we have covered. So if there are no more questions, no, we'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It is now for the ward member, which of course is me. I did call this in long before I was even thought I'd be chairman of the committee, but Councillor Law very kindly agreed that I could call it in. And let me tell you why. I've represented the ward of Bucklebury, as you know, for some time, a very rural ward, comprising a number of farms. And I've always regarded that farmers are they're the custodians of the countryside. They're the ones who look after the hedgerows. They're the ones that make the countryside. They use it to make a living, but they are looking after the countryside that we value. So you will recall elsewhere in my ward, about a year ago, we had a debate about, it was a wooden chalet, if you remember, and about the need for a shepherdess. And I had a light bulb moment that thinking, well, you don't need a shepherdess just 3 months of the year. You need someone, a stock person, 12 months of the year. And the reason I called this in, representing the parish of Midgham as part of the Bucklebury ward, and I first met Mr. Inwood's father, Mr. Inwood, when I represented Midgham in the 1990s. Then we were all rearranged and I lost Midgham and I've got it back again. And I have to say, why I call this in particular is that this is not a start-up enterprise, as you've heard. If this was someone who just speculatively bought a plot of land, we'd be looking for a mobile home or a big shed to prove the viability. But this farm's been in active working farm for 3 generations since 1938. And therefore, I think it is well established. You will see, and I think that one of the key issues, one of the key points following the sad death of Mr. Inwood's father, that clearly he has been working very hard for 2 years in building up stock. And if I get the numbers wrong, forgive me, but he built this up to 39, which is just about the threshold of 40 cows needed, suckler breeding cows, for there to be the need for someone to be on site. But then one of the difficulties of farming is TB struck and he lost, I think it was 15. I'm looking for a nod. But I think why I'm saying that is the intention, I feel, is clear, that Mr. Inwood has a track record of building up the herd and is in the process of building it up again. We heard from Mr. Dyson that he and his family, who live in the old farmhouse, bought in 2004, I'd ask the question to you members, is it fair to expect a neighbour who has no farming connection to make phone calls if they hear a cow in distress in the middle of the night? And wait Mr. Inwood, all right, albeit only potentially 5 or 10 minutes away, to get there to resolve the issue. I think the thing that swayed me into calling this in is rural security. Now, we hear a lot of rural issues about rural security, both machinery, people entering land, people damaging animals. And that is why I had a sufficient sympathy to ensure that this application was heard in a very democratic way by you members to determine whether policy C5 is actually viable, whether this application is viable under policy C5. In other words, the viability in terms of the number of cows. Not quite there at the moment, but certainly the trend is there to be viable. There are two applications, or an application pending for more sheds to house the cattle, which hopefully will be determined. I have no idea when or what the outcome of that will be. But members, I thank you for those of you who braved the wilds of Midgeon. I know one or two of you had a little difficulty getting there, but thank you for finding it. Thank you for looking. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions for me, please ask. All right, you're letting me off lightly. In that case, we return to Mr. Dray. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Dray? And then I will ask Mr. Dray to make any comments before we come on to debate. So, Councillor Woodhams, was that a question for Mr. Dray?
Yes, I have three questions for Mr. Dray, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dray, in respect of policy C5, who makes the policy? Who signs off the policy? And finally, if the committee were minded to approve this application, would it set a precedent for similar future applications? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Chairman, through you, if I may. Policy C5 is in the Housing Site Allocations DPD, which was adopted by full council in 2017 after the usual examination process for a development plan document. Just a full council decision, the policy. It's governed by planning law that it therefore forms part of the development plan. So it's planning law that decisions must be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. So, and in a roundabout way to answer your precedent question, I think the first thing members need to do is assess, take their view, look at the individual criteria in the policy and consider whether or not the proposal complies with those criteria. You need to come to a conclusion on each criteria. I mean, they're grouped into different issues, and decide whether or not it complies with the criteria, and then whether it complies with the policy as a whole based on that. And then that will inform whether it's part of the development plan. In terms of setting a precedent, I mean, I'm cautious to guide members to make a decision that doesn't undermine the development plan. So if members decide that it does comply with policy C5 based on the merits of the case, based on our report and the evidence we've gathered and what you've heard tonight, then that's fair. But if you're basing that on site-specific reasons, then that it's hard to comment speculatively on precedent. I'll obviously jump in if I've got any concerns in that respect. But if you're basing it on the merits of what you're hearing on this particular application, then that's probably not a concern at this stage. But I will, of course, shout if I'm concerned in that respect. I hope that answers the question.
Right, Councillor Woodhams, I hope it does. I'm going to be a bit cheeky and take chairman's privilege and just ask Mr. Dray on the back of that, and I'll come back to you if you have any follow-up. But does that mean, Mr. Dray, that if our interpretation, having heard the evidence that we have from the applicant and his agent, and bear in mind that we've got effectively two agents here, we've got Kernos and we've got the applicant's agent. Are you saying that if our interpretation of the facts in terms of the viability, the numbers of cows, etc., satisfies us that it's compliant with C5, that we could make a legitimate decision on this tonight? Is that basically effectively what you're saying?
As long as, we've given you our view based on what we've assessed, what's been submitted. But the interpretation of policy is to a degree a matter of judgment. So if you look at each of those criteria and have a reasonable argument on each case, that's fine. In theory, but yeah, I will shout if I've got any concerns in that respect. So.
Thank you. Well, that helps me. Does it help you, Councillor Woodhams?
Entirely, and I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank
Other
you.
members, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Drake, a couple of points, if I may, to get your acceptance on the view that I'm putting, I suppose is the best way of stating this. Do you accept that the point raised earlier with regards to agricultural buildings being put on that land without further application to be correct, first of all? And secondly, you showed a view from the bottom of School Hill, I believe it is, at the T-junction, looking across to the field. Would you accept that a wider field of view on that camera lens would have actually shown buildings because it would have included the existing barn buildings that are there? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just writing this down so I don't forget your second question before I answer the first. On the first point, there was a point made about that an agricultural building can be erected under permitted development. There are, is correct, extensive permitted development rights for agricultural buildings in the General Permitted Development Order under Part 6. The majority of them are subject to a light touch prior approval. So basic details have to be submitted to the council. We would do basic checks to ensure that they are reasonably necessary for the purposes of agriculture. So there needs to be a justification for them that bears out. That at various other kind of preconditions to its application. And then we can make a decision whether or not we need further details on the siting and external appearance. So we can have a say as an authority in terms of whether it is the best location for it. And the appearance of it on the basis that it's got planning permission. It's just where is the appropriate location for it and its siting. So there are, the PD rights have conditions that have to be complied with, and there's a prior approval process, but in theory, yeah, agricultural buildings could potentially be built on the land subject to that, but it's not a straight go out tomorrow and do it, basically. Your second question was showing the slide, and if we zoomed out a bit and had the wider context, yeah, of course, we appreciate that it's 3D in person. You look around and the area is influenced by the existing buildings on both sides of the roads and both sides of the track. I think our concern is fundamentally that actually that aspect across there is open at the moment and undeveloped. And yes, I appreciate that it'll still be read in the context of the existing farm buildings as opposed to it being completely isolated from the, in a more isolated position. But our concern is primarily with the openness. But yeah, what you say does factor into that judgment. So I hope that answers.
Thank you both.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Sumner? Are there any other questions for our officers? Clearly not. Well, who's going to start the debate? Oh, Councillor Woodhams, that was quick. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I draw your attention to assessment against this council's policy C5. Page 28, 6.11, halfway through the paragraph states, the scale of the proposed enterprise at 25 suckler cows would still not generate an essential need to live on site, according to the council's consultant. In fact, the consultant has advised that approximately 40 suckler cows and above generates an essential need to live on site. Given these factors, the application is not considered to meet criteria 1 and 2 of policy C5. And further, page 29, 6.22 states it is understood that the applicant lives 2 miles away from the site in Upper Bucklebury, which is approximately a 5-minute car journey to the site. Policy C5 states that a new dwelling will be permitted where the need cannot be met by housing within existing settlement boundaries and the supporting text sets out that the council's preference is for accommodation to be located in nearby towns and villages. Or villages. This is in combination with the above discussion in regards to how there is at present no established need to live on site. And this means that criterion 4 of C5 has not been satisfied. It is considered the enterprise's current needs can therefore be met by the existing dwelling in Upper Bucklebury. Finally, Chairman, you can read in 6.33 conclusions on policy C5 where the proposal fails to comply with the various criteria. So, Mr. Chairman, I will be supporting the officer's recommendation to refuse planning permission on those and other reasons contained in the officer's report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks, Chairman. It seems to me this is going to hinge on this committee's opinion about whether or not there's an essential need for Mr. Inwood to be on site. Now, the policy C5, as far as I can see, doesn't come up with a number of cows. It doesn't do that. We've seen the consultant's report, the council's consultant's report, whose opinion, and that's clearly stated in his report, by the way, it's clearly stated that it's his opinion that 40 cows, suckler cows, would be required. Yeah, I think we've heard a compelling case from Mr. Inwood and Mr. Dyson, I think it was, that actually it's quite proper to take a different view and to suggest that a fewer number of cows is required to justify a judgment that there's an essential need for the farm worker to be on site. So I really think it wouldn't be going against policy necessarily for this committee to go against the officer's recommendation and recommend approval of the application. It's simply an interpretation based on the specific circumstances of this farm operation and the specific circumstances of this site as to whether there was an essential need for Mr. Inwood to be on site. And I must admit, I take at the moment, without prejudice and wanting to listen to everyone else, I take an entirely different view to Councillor Williams, and I would suggest that there is an essential need to be on site. But I look forward to other contributions.
So do I. Thank you for that contribution, Councillor McKinnon. I believe Councillor Macro was indicating, sorry, right on periphery of my vision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Councillor Woodhouse. And there's one other aspect to our policy, which I don't think has been mentioned. And that is that the development has no adverse effect on the rural character and heritage assets of the area. Well, we've been told it doesn't have any effect on the heritage assets, but I do believe that has quite a significant impact on the rural character, because the proposed site is quite an attractive site. The photographs we were shown don't actually give it justice. And there's quite an extensive view from the road down through that kind of valley to attractive countryside and trees beyond. In fact, I couldn't understand why it's not part of the AONB, to be quite frank. The other thing I'm concerned about is the future viability of the farm, because as I've mentioned before, a very high proportion of the, well, half basically of the profit comes from this basic payment, which dates back to the EU basically. And that's going to be replaced over the next 7 years with various schemes which require some public good. And I'm not sure that there's sufficient land in the ownership of the farm to actually do those kind of public good things to actually go forward. And if in the unfortunate circumstance the farm did not become viable in the future, then we'd end up with a house in a rural area, which would then become detached from the land and become a private dwelling, which I think would be something we would not want. So as I said, I support Councillor Woodhouse.
Right, thank you, Councillor Macro. Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a few issues that come to me, and they did when we were on site the other day when conversation was going on. I will state first of all that I have no issues with the policy that's in place. I think the policy is sound, but the chairman will know from my previous terms in the Eastern Area Planning Committee, my view on us sitting in a room having conversations about the applications is that we are looking by exception. We are looking at exceptionality. We're looking at slightly different cases. We are rightly a policy-driven authority. I have no issue with that. I applaud that. And I think in the right circumstances, that's absolutely what we should be doing. What we've got with this one, as Councillor McKinnon said, is a heavy weighting of opinion. And I think, therefore, it does come down to our opinion as to this individual circumstance. The precedence was mentioned earlier. And again, I'm content that we as a committee, by debating, by reviewing, by looking by exceptionality, don't set precedents. That's not what our outcomes do. What our outcomes do is enable a free view of an independent application that comes before us. And I'm content with that. I'm actually sympathetic to the applicant's concerns with regards to being away from his stock. I think from memory, from family links to the farming industry, there's a high risk in many terms, not least of which cost. If a person, if a farmer, if an organisation isn't in a suitable location to control the, in this case, livestock that they've got. And for me, the situation has been driven by an unfortunate set of circumstances. Clearly, if the applicant's father was still with us, he would be on site. He would be in a much better location to be able to address the needs of the farm. We are not in that position, and therefore we need, again, to look at the individual position that we are currently in. And I'm actually leaning towards favour of the applicant, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Somner. Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Stewart.
I just wanted to add really to others, and this is a real fine line for me. Listening to what Councillor Macro and Councillor Woodland have said, I understand those, and I also feel favour towards Councillor McKinnon and Councillor Somner's comments. One of the things that I was really interested in was the fact that we have Mr. Dyson and Mrs. Gray who have spoken in support of this application. And I thought it was really interesting to hear Mr. Dyson talk about the fact that, you know, he and his family at the moment seem to be acting as a temporary rural worker by sometimes being the ones to raise the alarm. And I can only imagine how difficult this must be actually to manage to manage the business as it is, but also to build it without actually being able to be on site. Looking at the points from policy C5, I actually think that, and again, as has been said, this is opinion, but my opinion is that I could tick every single one of these. I think if you bear in mind what we've heard tonight, the fact that, and there was one point I think that Mr. Inwood made around, you know, you can't build the business without having the capability and the capacity, and therefore the buildings and everything else to go with it to build the business. So stuck in a sort of an ever decreasing circle. So I'm actually finding that I'm probably in favour of and supporting the applicant as well.
Is that a proposal?
Oh, you know what I'm like with proposals, but yes, I think so.
I see Councillor Mays has indicated to speak. If that's a proposal of, could you elaborate?
The applicant.
Of approving this application subject to the usual conditions.
Yes.
Does that find a seconder?
A seconder.
Right. Okay. But I will, before I go to the vote, I always ask people if they wish to, if they indicate to speak. Councillor Mays.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen, everybody. My criteria really was that you have 80 hectares of land, some of it which is rented, and some of it which I believe is in or near Midgham. I think it was Mrs. Gray who said that she farmed in that area as well. And if Mr. Inwood can raise his cattle numbers above the 50 on the 80 hectares that he either rents or owns now, then I can see no reason why we shouldn't bend the rules and allow him to go ahead.
We don't bend rules,
Well,
we
okay.
interpret policy, Councillor Mays. I will chastise you for that expression.
I stand
But I know what you mean.
apologising for that comment, but that's the principle I adopt in this particular case. I think we have the land. If that land is permanently available on a rented basis, and if the house becomes an agricultural property in policy terms, then I would go ahead with it and vote in favour of that proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Mays. And you will take my
yes, I take
flippant remark not to heart, but you understand what I was saying. Councillor Linden, you have the last word. And I will ask Mr.
Chairman.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Longton.
Yeah.
I saw Councillor Linden first, then Councillor Longton.
Yes, Chairman. I think this is hearing the argument, a fairly marginal case, but I think there is always an opportunity for a farmer who's dedicated to try and get to the levels that we require. Obviously, I think an alternative location on site would have been right, but obviously there are difficulties with the constraints on the land. But farming is very, very challenging, and it's going to be more difficult for farming. And if there's an opportunity to keep some farmland going by approving this application, I'm minded for it, because yes, we are taking a risk, to be honest with you, and hopefully that you can get the numbers up to justify our faith in you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Linden. Councillor Longton, you can have the last word.
There we go. Sorry, very much of the view that farmers should be allowed and indeed encouraged to live on their farms, particularly where animals are concerned. My concern here is that it's against the policy, perhaps an ill-informed policy of our council, but I think I'm right in saying that you are intending that you will grow the herd till it is meeting the standards. And in that case, I shall have no hesitation in voting for allowing the application.
Thank you, Councillor Longton. Before I go for the vote, I'm just going to go back to Mr. Dray for the final word. You've heard the debate unfold, Mr. Dray. Perhaps you could assist us with some potential, some wise words of wisdom concerning conditions. I mean, I think you've heard from members that they feel that this application does meet the criteria of C5 in most cases. So we're not breaking any council policies. We are interpreting the council policies. And I think it was very unfortunate that a number of cattle were lost due to TB through no fault of the applicant, which reduced the numbers below the magic number, whatever that magic number is, which was the point I tried to make in my presentation, which I thought I'd made quite clearly. So Mr. Dray, rather, not Councillor Dray, Mr. Dray, would you please guide us with some conditions, please?
Thank you, Chairman. First, I don't know if Ms. Mayor wished to say anything. Just put a hand down now. But
yes, I was going to say that we've lost visual on Councillor Macro. I believe he can hear us because he spoke and we couldn't see him, but we could hear. I just want to make sure that he is happy that he's heard everything and that he's fine to contribute at this point.
I have heard everything. The battery on my laptop has run out.
Absolutely fine. Okay, so you are present. That's all. I
am present. And
I can vouch that I can hear him and see him as well. So, right, Mr. Dray, thank you. And I apologise that I didn't see your hand go up.
Cool. Thank you, Chairman. So, yeah, I understand that the proposal is on the basis that it's considered that it complies with the policy. It's C5 is my understanding. Thank you. Both President second nodded. Thank you. Yeah, and we have prepared a list of high-level conditions. What I'd ask is that if this gets carried, that the resolution is to grant planning permission subject to conditions and delegate the authority to come up with the conditions to officers, because there will be pre-commencement conditions as well, which we would have to get agreement with the applicant for. So on that basis. But I have got a quick list that I can run through quickly just to give you a flavour. So it'd be the usual 3 years to commence, the approved plans, submission of a schedule of materials, restrictive condition, an agricultural tie that it is tied to the farm, landscaping, both landscaping scheme and management, so a landscaping ecological management plan, details of hard and soft landscaping, I should say, tree protection conditions as recommended by the tree officer, the construction environmental management plan and construction method statement, which normally could be one thing, but they just deal with the impacts of during construction of like environmental assets and highway issues, things like that. Details of drainage and SUDs, electric charging points to comply with our policies for those on new dwellings, parking in accordance with the plans to make sure there's no on-street parking, cycle parking, again, a policy requirement. We would ask for the removal of permitted development rights. We are not in the AONB here, so they are quite extensive. So we would, given it's open all around as well, there's side extensions, rear extensions, quite sizable that could be added under permitted development. And finally, external lighting, even though we're not in the AONB, it's a rural area and in the setting. So they're the lists we had, but if the proposal could include a delegate to us, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
It would normally be absolutely right that we delegate. I will, of course, ask the proposer and the secretary if they're happy with that list that you've just given. Councillor Stewart?
I am indeed, thank you.
And
yes, Chair.
And Councillor McKinnon is happy. So without further ado, we have a recommendation subject to those conditions which will be delegated to officers to resolve the minutiae of, to approve this application. May I see those in favour, please raise your hands. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those against, please show 2. Conditional permission is granted.
Thank you all very much.
Okay. Right, members, without further ado, we will move straight on to the next item, which I'm hunting through my agenda to introduce for you. And it is the land west of Anchorvan Centre Bath Road, Pips Way in Beanham. And I've got Alice Atwood. You're going to introduce this one, aren't you? Sorry, can I just wait that Councillor Macro is having trouble with his computer? Could I just put you on pause for a minute? Well, have you got spare adapters? I'm fully charged. If you want to borrow an adapter, do you want to borrow my adapter? Oh, you can have this one. I'll unwind it. Unwind that. I'm charging. You pull me out if need be. You're fully charged as well, are you? I hope. Oh, I'm all right. I'm all right. I do apologise for this slight technical interruption. We're all subject to batteries, aren't we? Are we all charged? Yes, I know. Right, are you happy, Councillor Macro? You can hear everything that's going on. Right. So would you please take us through this application?
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen. Okay, right, so this application is at land of west of Anchorvan Centre, Bath Road, Pitts Way. Okay, yeah. So the proposal is for a scaffolding hire depot comprising of open storage area, modular office building and car parking, together with a means of access off Pips Way. The proposals also include drainage and landscaping. The reason this has been referred to the Eastern Committee is by our development control manager to look at the balance given between the economic benefits and the environmental considerations, considering this application is in the area of outstanding natural beauty. We are recommending for approval. So this is the location plan, showing you the site. The site is approximately 1.56 hectares. Just to give you some site context, the proposal is not within the defined settlement boundary and therefore is regarded as open countryside for the purposes of planning. The development is within the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, which runs along the edge of the A4. The application is located outside of the protected employment area known as the Beanham Industrial Site, that's shown in red, in the red hashed area. The site is also former landfill, which has been restored. So the site is actually regarded as greenfield land and does not fall within the definition of previously development land in the context of the NPPF. The site appearance is sort of been left, so some vegetation has sort of reclaimed the land. The majority of the area would be used for storage, and you can sort of see this here. And there would be this is where the office is, and then the car parking. The site is accessed off Pips Way, which is this road here. And there'd be 20 car parking spaces for staff, 4 parking spaces for visitors, 2 electric vehicle charging points, and cycle stands for 8 bikes. There are some opportunities for sustainable transport with regular bus route along the A4, and it is nearby the Old Maston railway station. Although it's considered the nature and use of the site, obviously most people would be driving there to pick up the scaffolding. There's also proposed landscaping on the edge of the site here, but there is also existing landscaping which would be sort of bolstered up through this proposal. This is the floor plan of the modular office building. You can see there's a reception, there's a kitchen for the drivers, a drying room, staff toilets, there's office spaces, open plan area, and a comms room. The floor area for this is about 252 square meters. These are the elevations of the modular building, and there is also a sectional drawing of the modular building. This is the landscaping plan. The application would retain the existing landscaping, which includes an earth bund, and the boundary to the north of the site would have a 5-meter strip of trees and shrub planting to the south of the site. The poplar trees would be retained, and there'd be additional small planting added in between them. There was a landscape visual assessment that was completed and submitted with this application, which recommended a strategy which responds to the minor and moderate visual impacts that would be generated from this scheme. The proposed landscaping scheme would mitigate the effects of the hard standing, and it is considered that it's considered within that report that the landscaping scheme would make it capable of absorbing the proposal into the surrounding site. This is the proposed drainage strategy. There was a drainage in the update report, but I'll speak more detail on that later on. This is the entrance to Pips Way. There was some questions about the gate, which there's a security guard based on site 24/7 to open and shut the gate and there is an agreement between the site's owner, which is Grundon's, about the operating hours, and there'll be arrangement between Grundon and the applicants about how the gate is accessed. This is the entrance to the site, and it also shows the existing earth bund. This is pips away, and this is the entrance to the site that was built under application 17003864 full. That was an application that was granted for an extension to anchor fans, which include a hard standing. They have sort of built that access, and that's what you can see there. Again, this is the access joining off pips away. This is the existing earth bund looking into the site towards, this is the anchor fans building that's already there. These are the poplar trees we were talking about earlier. This is on top of the earth bund looking over into the site, and you can sort of start to see some of the residential properties to the south. The neighbouring properties from the southern boundary are about 20 metres away when including front gardens, but if you're not including front gardens, then it would be about 41 properties would be about 41 metres away from the application site. This is the view again, anchor fans, you can see here, view into the site. Anchor fans looking into the site. This looking to the north of the site, further into the area of outstanding natural beauty. Again, this is what you can see from the site, and you can see the 5 metre tree boundary is actually forward of these trees, so it's actually forward of the vegetation you can see here, so that'd be sort of extra. And then this is looking from the site to the existing earth bund, which you can see here, which would be planted with even more vegetation. And that's the existing birth. This is standing in the site, looking at the existing earth bund, and like I said, there'd be more vegetation. So the most important policies for determining the principle of this application in officers' view are ADDP1, ADDP5, CS9, CS10 of the core strategy. ADPP1 finds that most development will be within or adjacent to settlements, and the majority of development will take place on previously developed land. The scale and density of development will be related to the site's accessibility, character, and surroundings. Significant intensification of uses will be avoided in areas that lack sufficient supporting infrastructure, facilities, and services, whereas opportunities to access them by public transport are limited, would also not be supported. The only appropriate limited development in the countryside will be allowed, with a focus of addressing identified needs and maintaining a strong rural economy. ADPP5 looks at the spatial strategy for the North Wessex Downs, recognising that that's a national landscape designation, and looks at preserving the special qualities of the North Wessex Downs. In terms of the economy, ADPP5 states that protected employments area within the area of outstanding natural beauty will continue to play a vital role in supporting the local economy, especially those in the edge of centre locations. Small businesses and local businesses will be supported and encouraged, protected within the area of outstanding natural beauty, providing local job opportunities and maintaining the rural economy. According to policy CS9, the council seeks to promote the growth and forecasting for changes in businesses in the planning period, and want to retain B8 uses in suitable locations. Proposal for industry and distribution storage uses, like this proposal, will be directed to the district's defined protected employment areas and the existing suitability of employment sites and premises. Any proposals for such uses outside of these area location will be assessed against the following criteria: capacity with the uses of the area and surrounding proposals and potential impacts for those uses, capacity and impact for the road network and access to sustainable parameters. In terms of managing scale, type and intensification of businesses, policy CS9 states that a range and types and ranges of business of employment sites and premises will be encouraged throughout the district to meet the needs of the local economy. The proposals for this development are considered to be in keeping with this policy, and we don't feel there is conflict. According to CS10 as well, because this is in the open countryside, so CS10 does apply. Proposals to diversify the local economy will be encouraged, particularly where they are located in adjacent to rural service centres and villages. Existing to small enterprises in rural areas will be supported in order to provide local job opportunities and maintaining vitality of smaller rural settlements. The proposal is not within the defined settled boundary, but is close to the settlement boundary of Aldermaston Wharf that runs opposite, which does have a predominantly rural character. The proposal is outside the rural protected employment area. However, it is felt that the use would be in keeping with the other uses on site. I think because as well to the north of the site, there is further an extent permission for other B2 and B8 uses, which hasn't been built yet. In essence, the rural character has been eroded by other industrial developments on either side of the site. There was an objection from the public and an objection from the parish council in regards to noise that would be generated by this development, which the applicant did submit a noise assessment, which was reviewed by our environmental health officer, and it was felt that it could be mitigated by condition by the submission of a noise management plan. As said earlier, the landscape, there was an LVA which looked at the proposals, and it was felt that the proposals' nature and scale on balance would be acceptably absorbed into the landscape without any significant harm to the baseline landscape of the what's there already, considering that there are other industrial developments nearby. There's also a considerable economic benefit to this. The proposal would lead to the creation of 20 employment opportunities and has the full support of the economic officer. There was the EA and environmental health have no objections in terms of contamination on the site, long as conditions are agreed, and they have been agreed. Yep, and there was no comment from ecology, but ecology, there was an ecology plan as part of this with the landscaping, and there's also a condition that relates to an ecological and landscaping management plan that has been accepted. There was also no transport objections to this application. I think the only other thing just to briefly mention is just because this development is in the North Wessex Downs area of natural standing beauty, it's up to the decision maker to decide whether this is a major development, and that's by looking at the nature and scale, and it's considered that because this is when you compare this to the existing commercial development that does affect the character of the site, we don't consider this to be a major development in the context of paragraph 172 in the area of outstanding natural beauty. just finally, this was the previous outline of the previous application, which was the extension to anchor vans, just so you can kind of see the original site. This has extent permission, and then that was the block plan for the previously approved. And this is just to show you, the anchor vans, our site is here, and this is just to kind of show you the potential development, which would be to the west. And this is the Porsche development, which is already there, just to kind of give you a bit of extra context. So yeah, we consider it to be finely balanced, but we do give significant weight to the economic impacts and the fact that the rural character has been eroded. Just to Bob now to refer to the update report.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah, Chairman, I'd just like to update members on the update report very briefly. There are two issues which it addresses. One is for an hour increase on the delivery hours condition. So an hour starting at 7 a.m. Mondays to Fridays, bringing that an extra hour forward at the request of the applicant, which we consider a reasonable request after seeing the report being published. We've also had consultation response from the lead local flood authority, which wasn't available to us when we were preparing the original response. A lot of our negotiations at that point were based with the Environment Agency primarily. But I think comments were made on site about drainage issues in the past in the local area. So this all flows from that as well. They did have some detailed concerns with the proposed drainage strategy that accompanies the application at the moment. We've obviously approved a slightly smaller scale development on the site already, and there it was agreed that a runoff rate of 3.6 litres per second from the site was acceptable in the context of the drainage issues in the area. And what the drainage strategy proposing was higher than that. But we have negotiated between the applicant and the local authority over the last few days, and we are happy that that detail is something that we can address by a condition. So we've, on the update report, proposed an alternative condition. But I want to speak, because unfortunately, we noticed that we want to make a few very minor changes to that condition as well, since the update report was published. So apologies for that. But essentially, we need to remove references to infiltration in that condition because the site's former landfill, infiltration is not acceptable, basically. So what I would ask to do is, if members accept our recommendation, is again just to delegate condition to officers, and essentially we will make some very minor amendments to that condition. It will be fundamental, largely what you see there, but just to tweak those points there to make it clear that infiltration isn't to be done on the site, and any consequential amendments to that. So that's all I wanted to add, Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Atwood and Mr. Dre, for that. I think we got your point about infiltration. If members have any questions, they can ask you shortly. So moving on, we don't have any parish council representative. We do have an objector, Peter McEwen. Mr. McEwen, oh, there you are. If you could unmute, please. You have up to 5 minutes to say what you wish us to hear, but please remain there afterwards for any questions that members may have. So welcome, and over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I live in Beenham Village, and I am on Beenham Parish Council. And we look out over this industrial area of Beenham, and I don't think the analysis of this application takes allowance for the fact that when there's a south wind or on the south sector, that sound comes straight up the hill and into our houses and significantly impacts on the quality of life in Beenham. The road we just live with, it's just a noise. The trains we can hear when they go past, but they're nice trains. It's the bangings, and Marley tiles doesn't make much of a noise, but there are some places which make banging noises. Now, I might be totally wrong as to what a scaffolding depot does, but when I've had a building site near me and scaffolding tube makes an awful bang, and it's not the steady sounds, which leads on to one specific thing that in section 638 of the committee report, it said, yes, this is in an area of national beauty, but it's down by the A4 and it's a bit of a mess. But I live in Beanham and I am impacted, and I am in a quiet place. So when you say it doesn't matter if we make a bit more noise, I think that contravenes the area of natural beauty. The noise assessment report didn't look at this. It looked at the noise levels in neighbouring places, which are on the same level, and they've got hedges in between. But it didn't look at how the noise travels up the hill. And it didn't look at banging noises. It looked at sawing as being the only industrial activity. It then said, well, let's move everything to the north of the site because it will make the noise better. And that's moving it nearer to Beanham Village. So I don't think the noise assessment, or looking at my concerns about the noise assessment, got the real what I was getting on at. So that was my main thrust of my point. But the noise management plan, I hope if it is published, which it is, isn't it? And it does set guidelines which can be measured, maybe we will be in a better position than with other sites nearby where we've got just no control over them. But we do have one control over some of the more noisy sites, which is that their operating hours stop at 1 o'clock on a Saturday. And Saturday morning, you're going to be outside, it's noisy, you have to live with it, or you go indoors. Come Saturday afternoon, it's bliss. This has got 7-day operations, just about, and now they're saying start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and that's when the people come in to load up and get away and out on the site, and it's when I'm just waking up. So
you have 30 seconds left, Mr. McEwen.
So the working hours are one thing I would stress, and the other thing is landscaping. Having a hedge is not going to change our views looking down. If you have tall trees, that will in time will have a visual barrier. That'll do me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions? Oh, I've got one already. Councillor Sumner.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. McEwen, I just want to clarify something. I think I've just heard you correctly, that you said 7 a.m. starting hours. The details that I'm looking at, both for customer opening hours, delivery hours and operating hours, don't seem to be any earlier than 8. I know it's only an hour, but I just wanted to confirm that I understood you correctly.
I think Bob Gray mentioned it, that it's been changed just recently.
Yeah, it's on the update sheet under 3 on page 3 of the update sheet. Has requested the delivery hour restrictions amended slightly to allow deliveries from 7 on Mondays to Fridays.
Noted, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McEwen.
Any other questions for Mr. McEwen? I'm sure we will take your views, and thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm sure we will see if we can reflect on your views that you've told us. You're very welcome to stay with us, Mr. McEwen, but if I could trouble you just to mute again, please. Thank you. Right, going back to the update sheet, we have no supporters to speak. We do have Chris Jessen from the Agents Planning and Design Group. Mr. Jessen, over to you. The same rules apply. You have up to 5 minutes to address us, and please remain there for any questions. Your time starts now.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak in support of this application. I am Chris Jessen, Associate Town Planner at Planning and Design Group and the agent of this particular application. Firstly, I will begin by explaining a little bit more about who Generation are and what the purpose and significance of the site will be. Forming part of the Altrad Group, who are a world leader in the provision of industrial services, Generation is the UK's largest supplier of access, scaffolding, groundworks, edge protection, safety and training products. A nationwide network of branches, none of which are currently within West Berkshire, provide a full hire and sale service to the construction, events, industrial and utility sectors. But I must clarify that this proposal is for a wholesale site. It's not open to the general public unless by prior appointment, and it rather serves the whole industry as an integral part of the supply chain with its delivery fleet. Traffic movements are therefore consequently much lower than had it been a fully public operation. Generation sites are professionally managed, neighbourly and considerate operations with permanent on-site management and security. This is the only suitable site in West Berkshire that Generation considers will be suitable to meet its operational and commercial requirements as it expands its branch network. Clearly, the provision of scaffolding and industrial services is a critical component of the supply chain, which is known to be currently capacity constrained through a shortage of resource and materials. It is essential that sufficient geographic coverage is provided for the supply of these services to avoid delays further in the sequence. At a time of moving forward out of the pandemic, in this context, future investment in the supply chain is critical. Economic growth is a matter that the National Planning Policy Framework attaches great importance, and according to paragraph 80, decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt, and significant weight should be given to the need to support economic growth and prosperity. Indeed, the proposal is supported by the Economic Development Team of the Council and will deliver 20 full-time jobs. But I must stress that the further reaching implications of the supply chain and jobs within it and the industry will be in addition to that. Furthermore, the proposal from Generation being put forward as a planning application has the support of Grundon as the key employer and landowner of the site, allowing the land diversification of uses in the location. The layout has been holistically designed to respond to the surrounding character and land uses. Specifically, the scheme has been designed to contain and discharge surface water at a controlled rate, avoiding implications off-site. The submitted noise assessment has been scoped throughout to exactly the same requirements specified by the Environmental Health Officer, and demonstrated there will be no anticipated harmful impacts, and hours of construction operation will be controlled by condition. This considered the impacts upon the village in Beenham, and it also took into account the existing effects of the Beenham industrial estate, and those effects take precedence over the likely impacts of noise of the application itself. We have been working with West Berkshire Council and consultees to ensure there are no residual technical considerations that exist that will prevent the positive determination of this application, and it also includes the support of Natural England in the context of the area of outstanding natural beauty, as well as the aforementioned Environment Agency, Lead Local Authority, Highways Authority, Pipelines Authority and the EHO. The officer's report agrees that the scheme is located in a sustainable location within the context of the adjacent industrial estate. It has responded to the need to protect the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty and includes a landscaping buffer and biodiversity enhancements, resulting in the support that has been given. The economic benefits and policy support are considered to outweigh any residual limited harm, as concluded in the report before you. And ultimately, all of those above attributes deliver a balanced and sensitively considered employment proposal. There are wider economic benefits to the industry and supply chain beyond that. and it's justified in the report before you that this particular proposal, on balance, fulfills the council's objectives and meets adopted local plan policy. In effect, it embodies what planning is about.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Sustainable growth, supporting business in a manner that does not materially create harm, and finding good planning solutions to long-term vacant sites. And the opening hours, I must just finally add that were expressed as 7 a.m. start Monday to Friday at the point of applying. It was a point of clarification. It's in the application form from the outset. And that's why we brought that to the attention today.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, members, any questions for Mr. Jesson? Councillor Woodhams.
Yes, thank you. So I'm looking at some photographs, and one of them in particular, there's a view of the application site from Earthbund looking south, joining Pipsway looking south. And from the photographs, we can see some tall, sparse trees with some rather strange looking foliage in between. I just wondered to help the neighbouring properties across the other side of the A4, whether you would consider a stronger, higher bund to muffle some of the sound. And in particular, when you have lorries reversing, they have alarms that sound, obviously. Is there anything in that area you can help us with, please?
The application is included within the submitted drainage strategy. There is actually a proposal for a part of a bund structure that will be in part to contain surface water. So that will have a double impact actually at being able to create a landscape scheme. But notwithstanding that, there is a proposal in the conditions to submit a full landscaping and ecology management scheme, and the details of how the southern part of the site is addressed will be entirely contained within that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I share Mr. McEwen's concerns about noise, particularly from scaffold poles, which make a horrible ringing noise when they bang on the ground or against each other. Now, you mentioned that the site is wholesale, but the description of the site in our report, and I believe on the application form, says it's a higher site. And I can't quite understand how it can be wholesale and higher at the same time. And could you reassure me that there won't be this possibility of individual scaffold poles being moved around, which might cause significant noise?
Of course. I mean, the proposal is supported by a number of conditions that will control the management and manoeuvring of operations on the site, and the implications of that on noise in a number of other contexts. By and large, the delivery fleet of generation will take equipment off site to the purchaser, to the consumer. So the public appointment, it would be appointment only as to whether anybody goes to site, and scaffolding themselves are put within the site within the storage area securely on pallets. They are moved and they're held secure within the area in which they're placed. This is not, I mean, there is an existing business, I think, that operates locally that involves metals recycling. It's a much far removed proposal to that sort of facility. And, some of the noise considerations may well be taking into the concerns on noise, may well be taking that precedent noise impact of a recycling facility, which is involved, which inevitably will create at times a acute noise impact. This will not be creating that, but the proposed planning conditions in place are very, very thorough as to what the operational and management implications will be of this site, and they will require approval of the local planning authority.
Are you happy, Councillor Macro?
Can I just come back on that? If scaffolding is hired out, it will be returned. So it presumably go out on the pallets you mentioned. Will it come back on the pallets, or will it come back as individual poles? Because if it comes back as individual poles, then that awakens this concern about the noise that might be generated from them being moved around.
It is my understanding that it would be returned as it left, but if that's a point of clarification you wish us to add, then we can do so.
Thank you.
Right, well, thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Jessen.
Thank you.
Right, we have the ward member isn't with us. So members, questions for officers, first of all. So any questions for Mrs. Atwood? Are you all happy? Oh, Councillor Linden.
Yes, if I could beg some indulgence, it also concerns Paul Goddard as well. Could I have the photograph of the entrance from the roundabout, please, Alice?
Yep.
Right. I noticed on the hatching there's something loose cover there. I just thought I'd mention it, whether that's a road safety issue, whether it's loose or whether it can be sorted out. And that's why I asked for Paul's view on it. Alice, do you have any further information on that?
Not on that specific point. Paul, would you have any thoughts?
Good evening. Sorry, Councillor Linden, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, on the hatching, there's something that's on that entrance area that's raised, and potentially that could be potentially a hazard, or whether that's permanent. My mouse isn't working, but as you can see, there's a raised bit on the close up to the entrance. Can you see that's raised?
Triangle shape.
It's not a triangle, but an oblong shape.
Chairman, that is a splitter island that you would normally see on the entrance from a roundabout to separate traffic streams.
There's something on top of it. That's what I'm referring to. Is that okay? I'm just wondered for a road safety.
I'm sure it's something, Councillor Linden, that if whether it's detrimental to this application or not is something that we could ask our officers to look at under conditions.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, Jim.
Thank you. I will look to see what it is, some sort of inspection chamber or something, or maybe where a keep left bollard was, but I will look into it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Councillor Somdan, we're still on questions. You have a question?
Thank you, Chairman. The issue of noise, I wrongly assumed when I read through the paperwork and when we were at the site that the biggest issue for noise was going to be for those properties on the A4. Yeah. Clearly, Mr. McEwen's statement scotches that completely. So I'd just like some clarity from officers, please, with regards to what mitigation could be added. I'm mindful of, for example, acoustic barriers along the A4 Bath Road in Calcutta, which I would have thought would be possible for the Bath Road issues, but I'm failing to see what mitigation could be put in for anybody in Beenham. Just like officers' views on that, please, Chairman.
I'd like to take that one. Mrs. Atwood?
Oh, I will. Thank you. So the environmental health officer did actually look at the two objections in relation to noise and looked at the noise assessment report that was put before making their comments. So it was very much in their mind, and I did ask them if it was going to be an issue, and in their professional opinion, they felt that it wasn't. There was limited harm, because at the end of the day, you do have the noise from the Bath Road and also from other industrial processes there, and it was felt that it wouldn't add anything substantially more harmful to what's there already. And there's also a condition which looks at putting a noise management plan in place, which means there will be noise extra noise mitigations on top of the ones that were already suggested in the report. In addition, there's clear guidance in the MPBG, which, because obviously the area of outstanding natural beauty, tranquility is an important characteristic. However, the NPPG finds that you've got to look at what's already there, and tranquility is normally relatively undisturbed by noise from human sources that would undermine the intrinsic character of the area. I think when we were on site, it wasn't necessarily a area that wasn't already it has noise from human resources sources already, and like I said, the noise assessment found that those would be part of but wouldn't be substantially harmful, and that was also backed up by the environmental health officer.
Thank you for that answer. Any other questions for officers? Oh, got two, Councillor Mays and Councillor Macro.
What my first problem is, or question for Alice or Bob, would be the original surface of the fill material is gravel, I understand, or soil. Then it was, in one of the drawings, is marked as concrete. On site, we were told it was going to be compacted hardcore. And I think on the update sheet, it talks about tarmac. Well, all this has an effect on the runoff figures that are also mentioned in the update sheet. So perhaps we can confirm what the surface of the storage area will be.
Ms. Atwood, can you help us with that?
I believe it was it's going to be concrete, but also as one of the conditions, if you had and on the SUDS condition that's been drafted in the update report, details of hard standing are required as part of that, as well as various other bits.
It talks about tarmac here.
Tarmac, yeah, I'm under looking at, I don't know why they said tarmac, because on the plans it says concrete, and it was my impression that it was concrete, because that's what the written information with the
well, just to help move things along a little bit, are we not able to condition this, or at least when it comes to debate? Mr. Dre, would you agree with that?
He's not talking.
Mr. Dre, if you are talking, we can't hear you.
Apologies, I'm muted. Still got it. Yeah, we can, as part of the materials condition, look at confirming that it's if we've got duplicitous information on those plans. Yeah, understanding it was concrete, but the critical thing when it comes to drainage, according to our drainage engineers, is the discharge rate from the site, because we're not because it's a landfill. There's no discharge within the site, so it's got to be held and discharged at a pretty acceptable rate. And they're happy that, so there will be an impervious surface, and the water will be collected, stored, and then released at that acceptable rate. So it's covered by, I think the two issues raised are covered by the materials condition and the drainage condition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dre. Councillor Mays.
Yeah, Bob, can you tell me, you're talking about the infiltration rates from the buildings, downpipes presumably, but what about the runoff from the actual hard standing area? That's not included in the 3.61 litres per second that's quoted in the text, is it?
That's my understanding, that we're talking the discharge rate off the site.
The whole site?
That's my understanding, yeah.
I can't believe it. Is that per hectare? Sorry, is that per hectare or litre per second per what?
The rate at which the water's been discharged off the site, for the whole site.
Well, just to move this along, can I ask either Mr. Dre or Mrs. Atwood just to have a quick look at that particular aspect while I get Councillor Macro, and I'll come back to you, Councillor Mays. I'm not trying to cut you short, but Councillor Macro, if you could ask your question, and perhaps one of the officers could just look at that very important point that Councillor Mays just made.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, on the updated sheet, it does talk about the off-site discharge into the existing ditch, so it implies it's from the site. I'm very surprised that there's been no objections from any of the residents along the Bath Road. And I just want to confirm that a orange notice was actually prominently displayed.
Yes, there was an orange notice facing the residents, but also I think I can double check, but I think there would have been a notice in the newspaper because this was a major in the context of the GDPR.
Okay.
It has been advertised.
Good. Right, before I go ask members to enter into debate, can any of you add to this runoff of water issue that Councillor Mays has raised? Can't hear you, Bob.
Apologies. I'll read out what the drainage engineer said. This is on the update report. So at the end of the first page and onto the second page. Previously, the discharge rate was agreed. This is referring to the approved development on the site. The discharge rate was agreed as 3.6 litres per second, so for the site, whereas it is now proposed to increase that to 5.54 or 6.52 litres per second, depending on which scenario is being assessed. And so they raised concerns with that because of the effect of the off-site discharge would have on the wider drainage system, particularly in respect of Oak End Way, immediately south of the A4 roundabout, which is vulnerable to flooding from surface water. As such, discharge rate from the current proposals should be no greater than the previously agreed figure of 3.6 litres per second. So we're taking that to be from the site as a whole. So the drainage proposals will need to, so you have an impervious layer, they will need to store water on site in grates and then manage the rate at which it goes off site so that it doesn't overload those systems. And it's been achieved on the extent consent. So yes, and everyone who's been involved in this is be content that it can be dealt with on the current proposals. So I hope that clarifies.
So it can be dealt with by condition and plan. Yes, is what you're saying. Yeah. Big
and we,
nods,
as I say,
big nods. Right. Good. Excellent.
And we will say if we've asked if you support our recommendation, that we will fine tune that condition as well.
Okay. Are you happy, Councillor Mays?
Yeah, Bob. You know, I sent you an email yesterday. Did you receive that email before 4 o'clock yesterday?
That went to Stuart Clark.
But it went to you as well.
Yes. Yes.
You have seen it. Okay.
And Stuart Clark has agreed the condition. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Are we done with questions? I'm looking for debate. Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Wade straight in with this one, really. I'm on balance, I'll use that phrase early doors, prepared to accept officer's recommendation on this. However, I think we need some very careful wording and actions with regards to noise. It sounds like the SUDS issue is being addressed. I'm content with that. Mr. Jessen mentioned the workings of A4 metal recycling. Other metal recyclers are available. What he didn't mention is that they don't start until 8:30 in the morning. They don't work on Sundays, and they don't work on bank holidays either. And if we're going to have some consistency in the units that are along there, then we need to have exactly that. For me, Chairman, we need to have some sort of understanding of the existing businesses' opening times. I'm not content with a 7 o'clock start time. I thought 8 o'clock would have been sufficient. Whether it was by error or whatever reason, the update sheet, and my apologies for not seeing that earlier, to put those opening times at 7 o'clock, I'm not content with. And I think that is something that we as members have a responsibility to take care of.
Thank you, Councillor Somner. Councillor Macro, then Councillor Woodhams.
Thank you. Yes, I was not at all happy with the idea of them starting work at 7:30, but I thought was very early. 8 would be more acceptable. But I'm still very worried about the noise aspect. And ideally, I think our environmental health people would have visited another depot and actually measured the noise. They have a depot in Frimley, so I'm wondering, is there any possibility we could perhaps defer this while such a visit is takes place to assure us that this would not cause unnecessary and unacceptable noise?
Well, look, I'm going to let the debate go on, Councillor Macro, to see if that view is shared. Councillor Woodhams, then Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I share the same view to Councillor Sumner in respect of the opening hours. I think 8 o'clock in the morning would be acceptable. Saturdays till 6. I mean, we rather like having our afternoons off, I think. I'm not absolutely certain of how much noise the site will generate, but I'm sure that 6 o'clock is a bit late. And Sundays and public holidays, 8 till 1. I think that could be refined back as well. We do have, just across the road, a large number of residents, and we've heard as far away up the hill in Beanham that they're affected as well. So, as I say, I'm not absolutely 100% sure as how much noise this operation will generate, but these times I think need to be refined back a little bit in line with Councillor Sumner's view.
Thank you, Councillor Woodhams. Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. So there's no objections from the AONB here or Natural England, and I think having visited the site, you can see why. You know, the objections, rightly, I think, are along noise grounds rather than outstanding natural beauty grounds. I share the concerns that Councillor Woodhams and Sumner and Macro have said about opening hours. I think that's completely correct. I'm a bit disappointed, actually, that we've seemed to have just accepted this 7 o'clock request without questioning it. I think 8 AM far more civilised, and the points about Saturdays, Sundays and public holidays I would completely agree with. It's things like reversing beepers. They really do carry up the hill. And, you know, like Councillor Sumner, I hadn't really appreciated about the site visit that was where the main objectives were going to arise from. So, yeah, it would be good to see some mitigation of that. I think, is it enough for me to go against officers' recommendations? I think no, mainly because of where that site is. There's other industrial units right next to it on both sides. Other noisy sites exist, and I've got every sympathy with this McEwen's point about noise. And if this was the first industrial site in that area and there wasn't any other noise there, then I would have a bit more sympathy with him. But I totally get his frustrations along that score. So yes, I would like to see some stronger restrictions on opening hours. But I think on balance, particularly given the economic development benefits here, 20 jobs being created and supply chain benefits, I think that it's good to see that weight's been given to this. I'm really pleased to see that in the report. So I think on balance, I'd be in favour of going along with officers' recommendations, but with stronger mitigations on opening hours and noise.
I'm not going to ask if that's a proposal yet, because I'm going to ask Mr. Dray what he feels his guidance could be if you were to make a proposal, Councillor McKinnon or anyone else, about imposing time restrictions. Now, we've been assured that these aren't loose scaffolding poles being thrown around noisily, but I do take your point that there will be trucks and beepers and so on and so forth. It is not a silent operation, I get it. So, timings. Mr. Dray, would you like to be woken up at 7 in the morning or disturbed having a barbecue for 5:30 on a Saturday? Can you guide us, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. You can consider altering the hours we've recommended, but I'd ask you to bear in mind that there are the contextual conditions, one that it's necessary to make the development acceptable, and obviously I think there's a view being sounded here that that may well be the case, but also that it's a reasonable condition to impose on the site, the operator may, in order for it to be a viable business as well. I can't comment on that myself personally, but it's something to bear in mind. I would like to make just a point about the noise management plan. Obviously, the environmental health officers have assessed the noise report that's been provided, consider it robust, and they've done that in light of the objections that have been raised. So from our view, we obviously understand that's been taken into account. The purpose of the noise management plan is to give some specific operational and management guidelines or parameters within which the site can operate, and something that the applicant would submit to us. So this is how we intend to manage the site. And I think some of the things that we've heard today, such as it's the wholesale nature of the operation, give us some comfort that they're the kind of quite tight restrictions we can impose through this management plan, which will help minimize individual poles clanking around, and we hopefully avoid an operation like that. It sounds like that will be quite a reasonable constraint for us to put in. So I just want to make that extra point about the noise management plan. That I think that gives us quite a good opportunity to really tie down exactly how the site is managed and operated to minimize noise as well. But in terms of the hours, if you think it's necessary to make the development acceptable, then so be it. But please also consider whether it's a reasonable limit to impose on the business as well from the other side of the coin.
Right. Members, I'm in your hands. I'm looking for a proposal. I mean, clearly, if it's considered to be an unreasonable condition that we put on, the applicant could always go to appeal, but we always try to be reasonable and try to reach this compromise. As Councillor Sumner said, it's an unbalanced decision. So I'm not saying anything to influence you. I'm just looking for a proposal one way or another. Councillor Sumner has put his hand up, so over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm, as I said, happy to propose the acceptance of officer's recommendation with the caveat that a condition on the noise management plan needs to be stringent. And I think that with regards to opening hours, that they are not seen as an outlier for the industry along that stretch of road, Chairman.
So is that proposal then that the hours as printed?
It's a proposal that the hours that is printed are not acceptable.
Are not acceptable?
Correct. I don't believe, let's be quite clear, Mr. Jessen brought A4 metal recycling into the debate. They do not open with the same hours that we have listed in front of us now.
Okay.
And therefore, I don't find these hours acceptable.
Are you proposing any changes to those hours in your proposal?
My proposal is that either we look to change those hours to be in line with the existing or the original plan, or that we are more than minded is not strong enough, that we have to make sure that it is dealt with within the management plan for the noise of the area.
Is that sufficient for you, Mr. Dre, to work on in terms of?
I think there's two approaches you could adopt on this. You could either, as part of your proposal, amend the conditions and specify the hours which you think are acceptable, and amend conditions 18, 19 and 20, which relate to customer opening hours, delivery hours and operating hours, i.e. any repair jobs and stuff like that, respectively. So that's one approach to take. I suppose another approach you could consider taking is you could delete those conditions or add a requirement into the noise management plan, which is condition 11, and specifically state that you want reduced hours, and then essentially delegate to us to agree some reduced hours based on the debate here, but it defers it to consideration under the noise management plan, if that makes sense. So there's probably two options: either give us the specific hours to amend to conditions 18, 19 or 20, or perhaps delete them all as option 2, and in condition 11 say this plan shall include all of these various hour restrictions, and then we negotiate that based, and obviously with it being informed by this debate.
Councillor Sumner, what are you happy with?
Choices, Chairman. I'm content to go with the latter. I'm content with officers having the ability to give it due diligence and to make sure that the management plan is sufficient.
And could I add, Councillor Sumner, perhaps you may consider words such as in conjunction with consultation with the chairman, who could take this, or indeed the portfolio holder.
Grateful as ever for your guidance. So yes, I'm very, very happy to include both of those if necessary.
Right, that is seconded. Before we go any further, before I go to a vote or ask if anyone finally wishes to add any more, Mr. Dre, are you happy with that approach that we are proposing and seconding?
Yes, so it will be a proposal to accept officer recommendation with the caveat about delegating the conditions on drainage to officers, as in our introduction, and deleting deleting conditions 18, 19 and 20, but factor them into the noise management plan in condition 11. So we'll add some clauses in there to say the noise management plan that's going to be submitted shall cover these hours restrictions. And then when it comes to agreeing that detail by condition, we will consult with the chairman, vice chairman. It could be the proposer and the seconder, or sometimes we do ward member, so whoever you want us to consult with.
Well, I mean, in fairness, since this has engendered quite a lot of very reasonable and well-intended debate, I really think there should be wide consultation. I mean, are you going to get full agreement with 3 or 4 different views? I don't know, but I'm sure you will do your utmost. And I'm sure the agent has heard the very genuine concerns that have been expressed around this table. And our remit is very much to look at the employment benefits, but also to protect the interests of local residents. So that's the balance within which we work, which I think we're trying to adopt the most reasonable approach we possibly can. So I think in consultation, you, Vice Chairman and Chairman, and the portfolio holder, I think the ward member isn't here. I think he will be drawn into it anyway. So are you happy with that? Right.
Chairman, vice chairman and portfolio holder.
Absolutely. Now, members, can we go to the vote? Councillor Mays, do you want to make another point? Yes. Well, I'm told he is. You're going to tell me otherwise.
He's the one for
We can't hear that from here. This one.
Well, Councillor Mays has said that Councillor Berwick isn't the ward member, although that is printed. That's not always infallible. Who is the ward member then?
Sorry, he's the ward member for Aldermaston, yeah, which goes as far as the A4, doesn't it? Does it go? Or maybe I'm wrong. Sorry, I'm thinking about the old boundaries as well.
I think the old the new boundaries are different. I'm going to go with Councillor Berwick anyway. Yeah, okay. But right, I'm going to go to the vote. We've got a proposal which deletes the actual times for officers to negotiate in conjunction with various members. Those in favour, please show. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And those against? And 2 abstentions, I guess. Yeah. Right, so that is approved, subject to further negotiations with our officers, as you have heard. Right, so that concludes the business of Eastern Area Planning. I'd like to say, before signing off, thank you to you for making this live proper meeting possible. Thank you to those behind the scenes who have worked very hard to ensure that it is possible. Yeah, and the technology, apart from some slight battery issues and some very, very minor points, I think has held up very well. So I applaud that very much. So could you please stop streaming, Mr. Griffin?